All right. And so J Baba folks, we are inaugurating a new series of programs called Storytime. We, meaning Wendy, Kura and I, who who are we put our heads together and realized how much we love, particularly children's books, but not necessarily a good book. And that we would do a program where we would share a book for an hour or a couple of short books for half an hour, and just see what inspires. That's the important thing, that you love the book. And so, and now I'm going to start with this book. Let's see now. I have to make sure you see. Yeah, and unfortunately, we're not going to be able to share screen with this. So, because of we don't have these digitally, so we'll just have to show them the way we like this. This book, Little Annie of Christian Creek, was written, illustrated, and photographed by the same fellow, Thomas Sanker, who is a naturalist. And it's about a moose, about a moose that he just grew to love. This is her. This is Little Annie of Christian Creek. So, and I will kind of excerpt it. We can't read the whole thing, of course. So I will show you some of his incredible drawings. This is this is I believe it's a wolf or a coyote and a little squirrel. And this is the mama moose. This is Annie's mama moose. And so every muscle of the coyote tensed. He lay crouched and still in the grass, ready to pounce on a ground squirrel. Suddenly he heard a crunching sound from high up in the nearby willow thicket. He knew what it was and headed for the woods. Moments later, a huge moose stepped out into the meadow. She was over 6 feet high at the shoulders and weighed almost 1,000 pounds. Again, that's her. So that's the mama moose, and there she's okay. So then, let's see. And here's a picture of her. A month ago, the cow moose had come down to Christian Creek from the wooded ridge above, where she had spent the winter. By spring, she was very hungry. She'd been foraging constantly since coming to the meadow along the creek. In the woods, the coyote began a series of yelps and barks leading into a long, ghostly howl. Another coyote answered from Willow Flats. Others joined in, and soon the chorus filled the valley. The moose paid no attention. All morning, the moose gorged on willows near a beaver pond, but by early afternoon, she began to lose her appetite and feel tired. For a while, she munched on twigs here and there, but she soon lost interest. She waded into the shallow pond and sloshed past the beaver lodge. 2 beavers surfaced from the underwater entrance and slapped their tails on the water. This was their territory. They had created the pond by felling trees and using branches to build a dam on Christian Creek. They didn't like the moose so close to their lodge. Ignoring the grouchy beavers, the moose crossed the pond to a stand of fir trees and pines. She settled down on a soft mattress of pine needles and rested. But as nightfall approached, she hadn't moved. She didn't feel hungry. She didn't feel like getting up. So here's a beaver. This man took wonderful photographs. And then, okay, here's the mama moose again. Okay. But evening thunderstorms swept down from the Yellowstone country to the north. Aspen trees bent in the wind and rain splattered on the pond. All night she rested under the trees sheltered from the storm. By morning, it became clear why she had chosen this protected and hidden place. When the fog lifted through the evergreens, there were 3 moose lying on the soft pine needle bed. During the night, the cow had given birth to twins. So there's that drawing of the cow. At sunrise, the coyotes began howling. The mother moose heard them, and this time she paid attention. She stood and stiffened, her ears pivoted toward the sound as she tried to judge the distance of the coyotes. From now on, she would always be alert to the whereabouts of predators that could be dangerous to her helpless babies. Hungry for breakfast, the baby moose tried to stand, but with their wobbly legs, it wasn't easy. They kept falling down, sometimes on top of each other. The mother helped, encouraging them with soft grunts while gently nudging them to their feet. Within an hour, the calves were standing and began to suckle on their mother's milk. Here we go. There they are. And here. The beaver pond was a center of activity. When the beavers built the dam of sticks and mud on Christian Creek, they created a wetland habitat for many other animals: dragonflies, trout, frogs, ducks, geese, kingfishers, great blue herons, red-winged and yellow-headed blackbirds, muskrats, and otters and moose. The moose, here we go. Here's the beaver pond. And there's the babies watching. Okay. Nature's symphony tickled the twins' ears. Ducks and geese on the pond quacked and honked at each other most of the day. Woodpeckers rat-a-tatted on the hollow trees with their sharp beaks. Chickadees chickadeed from tree to tree. Leopard frogs in the beaver pond croaked deep-toned calls to mates, and chorus frogs started up their cheerful soprano peeping at dusk. While most of the sounds were of no concern to the mother moose, some noises made her nervous. The twins quickly learned about those noises. The howling of coyotes always got mother's attention, and she now paid attention to the beavers when they slapped the water with their tails, annoyed at an intruder. Black ravens, rascals of the forest, stood watch over the entire meadow from perches high in the trees. Their raucous cawing often warned the approach of an unwelcome visitor. Mother would lift her nose in the air, hoping to catch a scent that would identify the intruder. The shrill chattering of the resident tree squirrel was of more immediate concern to the twins' mother. When the grumpy little squirrel screeched at a stranger in the woods, the moose would become still as a tree, listening closely for a sound that might tell her who was being scolded. By watching their mother, the twins learned which noises and smells signaled danger. They learned to quiet themselves at those sounds and scents. They imitated their mother, pivoting their ears and thrusting their little noses in the air, just like she did. While their mother foraged a short distance away, the little moose explored the wondrous world on their own. They chased after butterflies, sneaked up on frogs, and tracked the flights of birds overhead. Everything that moved or made noise got their attention. They romped and tumbled and chased each other. Again, I'll show you that picture. They're looking at the butterflies. Chapter 3, Alone in the Woods. Okay, this the author is drawing a picture of himself. And he's nibbling on twigs. He'll tell. I pretended to nibble on willow branches, and I slouched along through the morning fog, just 30 yards ahead in Christian Creek. A huge bull moose with his massive velvet-colored antlers had me locked in his cold stare. Hoping he would think I was in the meadow feeding, I was careful not to stare back. I was there to take pictures. Let's see, I don't know if you can see this moose with his big rack. Maybe there. No, okay. Let's go. Good. Yeah. Okay. The whoopsie. There we go. Yeah, there we go. So, and here he is chewing the twigs. So he was aware of me long before I reached the meadow. I made too much noise coming down the wooded hill and got a rapid fire scolding from a red squirrel as I passed under her tree. He waited until I came into the open to see what I was up to. After a minute or so, he seemed to satisfied that I had no bad intentions and probably thought I looked foolish pretending to eat twigs. He returned his attention to breakfast and glanced at me every few minutes to be sure I was behaving. The bull heard a sound and looked up, fixing his attention on something behind me. I didn't hear anything, but followed his gaze to a stand of evergreen trees near a beaver pond. Moments later, a tiny honey-colored moose emerged cautiously from cover. The baby, only about 6 weeks old, walked slowly toward the bull and me. So here's the baby and with the bull moose in the background. The 6-week-old baby with his, yeah. This made me nervous. I stared past the calf into the trees looking for its mother. I was afraid that if the little moose came much closer, its mother would come after me. Once a cow moose had tried to kill me when she thought I was a threat to her newborn calf. She flattened her ears, bristled her withers, and charged. I ducked her slashing hooves and escaped only when she slammed into a tree I had scrambled behind. Still not seeing the mother, I began backing toward the woods. The bull watched the calf intently. With its attention focused on the bull, the little moose took a wide path around me and plowed through the tall grass toward the creek. This put me between the calf and its mother, a very dangerous position. Still, there was no sign of the mother. I began to worry less about her and pay more attention to what was happening in front of me. The calf stopped about 10 yards from the bull. What was going on here? I had never seen a baby moose so close to a bull moose. Again, this is that same picture. She's close. Moose mothers don't allow newborn calves out of their sight and never let them get close to humans or other moose. When half an hour passed with no sign of its mother, I knew the calf was an orphan. It then became clear what was happening. Hidden in the woods, alone and frightened, the calf had caught the familiar scent of its own kind. Except for the antlers, the older moose looked like its mother. A lonely orphan just wanted to be with another moose. But the bull moose wanted no part of the orphan. Moose spend most of the year alone and don't like intruders. The orphan paused at the pond's edge for a drink, then stepped into the water. Wanting to be left alone, the bull waded across and headed for the woods. But the orphan followed him across the meadow. The bull looked back and lowered his head. He had lost patience. He whirled and charged. Taken completely by surprise, the baby stumbled and barely got out of the way. The older moose then climbed into the woods above the pond. Again, the calf followed. Again, the bull charged. This time, he chased her into the willows. His message was clear. When he walked away, the calf stayed put. The confused little moose sat down in the willow thicket. Now, here's another picture of her, the moose. I began to search the area to see if I could find out what had happened to its mother. Beneath the evergreens near the beaver pond, I found the remains of a moose calf. Judging from the signs, it looked like this calf had fallen prey to coyotes. It most certainly was the orphan's twin, because two moose mothers would not have shared the same small area. But what had happened to the mother? I looked everywhere, the meadow, the surrounding forest and ridges, but found no sign of her. If she had died of sickness, I would have come across her remains. Whatever happened to the orphan's mother, I never found out. I wondered if there were ways I could help the orphan, but soon realized it would be wrong to interfere. I couldn't take it home and make it my pet. The little moose was a wild animal and lived where it was supposed to live, in the woods. I had no right to take it from its natural home. Bringing food to the calf would be a mistake. It would become dependent on me and never learn to find food for itself. The calf stayed hidden in the bushes all morning, afraid to come out. Finally, I left, wondering what might become of the little orphan moose, alone and scared in the woods. And this is a picture of him finding the bones of the other of the calf. Yeah. Chapter 4, Summer Friends. After I discovered the orphan was a female, the name Annie came to mind. Little Orphan Annie. Not very original, but Annie was a good name and seemed to fit. I asked some wildlife biologists about an orphaned moose's chances for survival. They all agreed that without the protection of its mother, a baby moose would probably not last 2 weeks. Even if by some miracle the calf made it through the summer, she could not possibly survive the harsh Rocky Mountain winter. I visited Annie nearly every day for a month. My hopes for her survival increased each time I saw her. She was 10 weeks old now and beating the odds. It saddened me to see her always alone out there, but she was alive and she looked healthy. Early one morning, I sat on a wooded ridge above Annie's meadow. Daylight was still an hour away, so I made myself comfortable on a cushion of pine needles and waited. I hoped to observe her without her seeing me. As dawn approached, I scanned the meadow with binoculars. I noticed a tawny shape in the grass. There was a slight movement, a flick of an ear. I knew it was Annie. She was partially hidden by the small grass, but sitting out in the open. Although I hoped she wasn't getting careless, I was glad to spot her so quickly. So here she is in the grass there. And here he is watching. These illustrations, I think, are just beautiful. Sometimes I would tramp around the willow thickets and nearly step on her before I'd see her. When Annie chose a good hiding place, I didn't mind spending a long time looking for her. It was fun to start the day with a game of hide and seek. For half an hour, she hardly moved. Then from the treetops, a raven's harsh cry rang out a warning. Annie sat upright, cocked her ears toward the sound. A bull elk with a mighty velvet antlers walked along the opposite ridge and then vanished in the forest. Things quieted down and Annie relaxed. The quiet didn't last. It was shattered by a chortling, trumpeting sound loud enough to bounce off the mountains and bring an echo back to the marsh. The source was 2 sandhill cranes flying low and giving everybody a wake-up call. Annie followed their flights as they soared overhead and landed in willow flats. The coyotes answered the cranes in a chorus, the higher-pitched yelps from the coyote pups, who were just learning to howl, improved the choir. So here are the coyotes howling. Okay. At the sound of the coyotes, Annie stood up quickly. Her eyes opened wide, her muzzle thrust upward, and both ears were riveted toward Willow Flats. The concert made her nervous. Either from her mother or from the fate of her twin, Annie had learned the danger of coyotes. When the howling stopped, Annie arched her back and stretched her legs. Shaking the dew from her golden coat, she began feeding on willows. Once she started nibbling on a pine branch, apparently interested in the cone. When she chomped on the pine cone, she snorted and shook her head. Squirrels, not moose, eat pine cones. By trial and error, Annie was learning what foods to eat. This was something her mother would have taught her, but Annie had to learn on her own. Here she is. After watching her from the ridge all morning, I decided that Annie didn't act any differently when I was around. That meant I hadn't been disrupting her routine. This was important because I felt it was wrong to influence her survival in any way, for better or worse. So when Annie finally sat down to rest, I went down into the brush for a visit. Annie watched me come. Oh, here she is. And wasn't bothered. She had gotten used to me in the past month. When I first began visiting her, she was afraid of me, so I gave her plenty of space. I used the pretend and never walked directly towards her. I used the pretending to eat grass trick, hoping she would think I was just another animal in the meadow. One morning in early August, Annie changed the rules. She was eating grass and grazing directly toward me. I stood waiting for her to change direction, but she never did. She kept coming, watching me carefully as she ate. Hardly breathing, I stood as still as a heron. Annie passed by so closely that her little belly nearly brushed against my hip. This is that picture again. There they are.
Betty?
Yeah.
How much longer does this story take? I just recently lost one of my kitty cats. I'm in a state of trauma from that. I joined the meeting this morning because it's a Baba meeting and I thought it would be Baba stories.
Yeah.
To hear about a mother being eaten by wolves and a baby, it's put the trauma right back. I must leave unless your story is almost done and there is a happy ending.
Oh, there is a happy ending, but I'm not.
This is a very traumatic. It's just, I was getting out of the grief and now I'm right in the middle of it again. You know, this is a Baba meeting. Why would you share trauma? I don't understand.
Oh, well, it's a happy ending. But I'm really sorry, Jill. I'm my sympathies. Yeah,
I want us to get on to something to do with Mehera Baba. That's why I'm here in this meeting this morning at 7:30 in the morning. Is Baba, not animals being eaten by wolves.
Who's next? Who's next?
This is
because Baba's everything.
Jill.
You know.
I don't want to be lectured either. I'm leaving.
I'm not lecturing. I'm giving my opinion. Baba is everything.
I'm sorry, when you're speaking to someone who's in trauma, you need to be careful what you say. I had better leave because I just need Baba's words and Baba's love right now.
Jill, just let me.
Yeah, I hope you find it.
Jill, let me just tell you the premise. The idea is it's not necessarily Baba stories. It's stories that you love, so I mean, in that sense, it's not Baba's here because it's and there's definitely a happy ending to this story, but I'm totally do whatever it makes you, you do make your decision. I'm sorry about your kitty. Yeah. Okay. So if you want to hang in, it's about maybe 20 more minutes. Okay. So, and this man and little orphan Annie are getting to know each other. Well, he never goes, he doesn't make her a pet. It's very important to him that she's a wild animal. Okay, so Annie and I spent a lot of time together in late summer. Jill, the premise is share a story that you love, and that's Baba's story or not. Uh,
Have a good day, dear. Thank you.
let's see, maybe I'll here. Okay. Annie and I spent a lot of time together in late summer. We sat in the meadow among the lupin, pink monkey flower, and red Indian paintbrush. We watched the flight of birds against brilliant blue skies. Often Annie's ears flicked to sounds I couldn't hear, and her nostrils flared to sense on the breeze. She was a good listener. Chewing quietly on her cud while I talked, I told her the names of the birds flying overhead and other animals that shared her woods. I told her that she was a moose, that moose was an Algonquin Native American word meaning twig eater. Annie didn't seem to mind being called a twig eater. As summer passed, I felt I had made a new friend. Here, I'll take one more. Same picture, just one more glance. Okay. Then by the end of summer, Annie had changed. Her honey-colored coat had darkened to nearly black, and her lower legs and bellies had turned light gray. She was only 3 months old and almost as big as a full-grown deer. Annie was doing surprisingly well by herself, and she still didn't like being alone. From the first morning I met her, Annie had never given up wanting to be with other moose. Although she tried to make friends, with every moose that came near her meadow, she always got chased away. This confused but never discouraged her. One September morning, a young bull moose grazed along Christian Creek. The bull, just over a year old, had been run off by his mother before she had a new baby in spring. That was his mother's way of telling him it was time to make his own way in the wild. Annie approached the yearling and stood just a few feet away, watching him graze. He didn't get angry, so when he walked across the meadow, Annie got and stepped behind him. So this is that bull moose, the young moose. The two youngsters climbed the ridge above the marsh and went through the woods together. Sometimes, Rosalie, you mind muting, Rosalie? Here, I can do it. Thanks. Sometime they stopped and fed next to each other. On the other side of the mill, they paused at the edge of a cliff. 100 feet below them, the expansive willow flat spread out to the Tetons. There were willows and meadows and ponds as far as they could see. A moose paradise. The bull braced his forelegs and started down the steep slope. Annie followed, slipping and sliding and kicking down rocks. For the first time, Annie had left her small crescent-shaped, moon-shaped meadow. For the first time since she lost her mother and twin, she was with a moose who didn't chase her away. Maybe she had finally found a moose who would be her friend. And there they are running. Round and round they went, zigzagging among the willows and splashing back and forth across the small pond, scattering quacking ducks into the air. Nobody had played with Annie since she romped in the meadow with her twin. After 15 minutes, Annie plopped down in the grass, exhausted. The bull stopped to catch his breath, took a long, quick drink from the pond, then, without looking back at Annie, he walked away. Annie stood up quickly and watched him disappear into the maze of willows. She didn't follow. She stood there for a few minutes, then sat back down. Her brief friendship was over. And she's watching him walk away. Why didn't Annie follow him? She might have been afraid to stray too far from her meadow, her birthplace, and the only home she knew. Maybe she remembered that her mother had taught her not to wander. Whatever her reason, Annie climbed back up the ridge and returned to her meadow, where everything was familiar. She was alone again. As September passed, the meadow changed its green dress for gold. The willow branches turned orange, red, and purple. The aspen leaves turned bright yellow, and cold wind from the north blew them from the leaves. They fluttered down and landed in the creek. The days grew short and the nights grew long and colder. Annie's instinct must have told her that a big change was coming, but she couldn't have known what it all meant. Clouds rolled across the sky and gusts of winds rushed through the meadow, sweeping leaves up into the air. The animals became as restless as the weather. Beavers chopped down aspen trees and gnawed off the branches, but didn't eat the leaves or bark. Instead, they dragged the limbs into their pond, stuck them into the muddy bottom, planting an underwater forest. This would be their food supply when the pond froze over in winter. Chipmunks stuffed their cheek pouches with seeds and berries and carried them into their burrows. Red squirrels gathered pine cones and nuts and buried them. Yellow-bellied marmots and ground squirrels didn't bother to gather any food. They crawled into their burrows and began to hibernate. They wouldn't need to eat for 6 months because they would be asleep from September to April. Okay, here's one of these. I think it's a red squirrel. Okay. The changing season brought some unfamiliar sounds that startled Annie. Her ears flicked to the explosions of gunfire from across the valley. There were hunters in the woods stalking elk. Annie would have to be careful if she wandered too far from her meadow. Through the night, Annie heard the eerie whistling bugle of bull elk as they charged each other and gathered herds of females. The hollow clatter of antlers told of bulls fighting. This was the rut, the mating season for many animals. So first, here's Annie. She's why she's gotten big. And here are the elk fighting. Okay. Even the solitary moose came together in the fall. Bull moose scraped the velvet from their antlers, leaving sharp tinted tined bone. Bulls became moody and ferocious, ready to charge anybody and anything. When bull moose fought, the boggy marsh shook under their power and the collision of their antlers thundered across the valley. The big change of weather began in October. As was my habit, I sat in the woods above Annie's meadow one morning, waiting for daybreak. During the night, the temperature had dropped below freezing. When the first rays of sunlight found their way through the pine trees, the grass sparkled with frost. Overnight, Annie's gold meadow had turned silver. Annie stood up and shook the glitter from her back. She walked across the silver carpet, making little crunching noises with each step in the icicle grass. Annie's diet would have to change. She chomped on the bare willow branches. The leaves were gone, but the winter buds were tasty. She ate pine saplings at the edge of the woods. She climbed the hill and gobbled up thistles. At the pond, Annie stopped for a drink, but when she lowered her head to the water, she bumped her nose on the frozen surface. She wouldn't be able to drink from her favorite watering hole for 6 months. So here's Annie looking at the frozen pond, trying to figure it out. In the distance, the faint sound of honking geese grew louder as the flock winged closer. Annie looked up and saw their perfect V formation, a big arrow pointing south. She watched as they passed overhead, honking and flapping, until they became quiet specks in the southern sky. The geese would not be back until spring. Other birds would follow. They would go to places such as Texas and Mexico, where they would find food and warmth. In Wyoming, the winter would bring Arctic temperatures, fierce winds, and drifting snows. By her extraordinary wit and savvy, Annie had survived summer and fall, but now at the edge of the frozen pond, she faced the mean season. Her real test of survival lay ahead. Chapter 6, the mean season. Following the great migration of birds, Christian Creek Meadow fell into November's gray silence. Most of the small animals had crawled into their cozy burrows. The elk had moved south to their winter range. Now any sound that broke the quiet seemed louder, more distinct, and carried farther in the crisp air. I could hear Annie crunching on twigs as I watched her in the willows 50 yards away. The air began to stir, and the dry aspen leaves left clinging to the trees and flicked in the wind. At first, just a few snowflakes floated down so slowly I could have counted them as they fell. Gradually, more and more fell, and soon the air was alive with huge swirling snowflakes. Annie stopped eating and looked up. Snow fell on her eyelashes and nose. She looked at me as if for an explanation, then headed for the cover of some big cottonwood trees. Without their leaves, the trees weren't much help, and the snow fell through the bare branches. Annie curled up tightly against a fallen tree. She kept staring at me like she was blaming me for all this white stuff. Yeah, that's her on the curled up. And there's another picture of her staring at him. Okay. What Annie didn't know was that it hadn't really snowed yet. Winter's ferocious storms were yet to come. The first one came on Thanksgiving. Over a foot of snow fell in the valley. After the holiday, I went to see how Annie had gotten along in the storm. I didn't see her near Christian Creek, but her tracks were everywhere, to and from the creek, in and out of willow thickets, up and down hillsides. She wasn't having any trouble getting around. I looked for fresh tracks and found some leading south out of the meadow. They traveled across the frozen pond, where Annie had tried to get a drink just a few weeks before. I circled the pond and hoped Annie was careful when she tramped across the frozen water. Her tracks led across the ridge where they turned off into the brush, and there sat Annie in the bushes. She glanced at me as I approached, but quickly returned her attention to the snow-covered marsh below. She was watching a cow and a calf moose browsing on willows. I sat down next to her, and we both watched the moose in silence. After a while, the moose calf left its mother and climbed a hill about 50 yards away. Annie got to her feet. With her ears forward and eyes wide open in anticipation, she walked toward the calf. Maybe this was a chance to make friends with a moose her own age. Through binoculars, I saw that the other calf was male, same age as Annie, but larger. When Annie got within 10 feet of him, he flattened his ears and stiffened his forelegs and a threatening posture. Annie stopped. The little bull took 2 aggressive steps forward to chase Annie away. Annie pinned her ears and charged. She chased the little bully across the top of the hill and down into the marsh. He ran and hid behind his mother. Annie came to a skidding stop. The calf's mother was furious. She glowered at Annie, her ears went flat, and the hair on her withers stood erect. She lowered and tilted her head to the side and started toward the little orphan. Annie didn't budge. She drew her weight up into her shoulders, trying to make herself look bigger. She flattened her ears, warning the big moose not to come any closer. This was too much for the mother moose. She lunged at Annie in a rage. So there you see the mother moose chasing Annie and the little boy in the background there. Annie dodged to one side and then ran like crazy. The mother quit the chase and returned to her calf in the willows. I hoped Annie had gotten the message to stay clear, but Annie was mad. She mimicked the mother moose, her head lowered to one side, ears flattened, and hackles raised. She swaggered stiff-legged toward the cow. Little Annie was threatening a half-ton adult moose. This time I thought she had gone too far. The mother moose thought so too. She exploded out of the willows and snow flew everywhere. Annie stumbled, dodging to the left. The big moose lashed out in a lethal kick at Annie's ribs, but at the same instant, Annie swung her hindquarters around. The kick barely missed its mark, and Annie headed for the willows. The enraged cow whirled around and chased her, but gave it up when Annie scrambled into the thick underbrush. The mother snorted and went back to her calf. Annie circled around and watched from a safe distance. The big moose stared hard at Annie, then turned and led her calf up the hillside past me. She threw a nasty glare at me as she went by, so I backed down the hill. Annie and I watched them disappear into the woods. I wondered if Annie knew how close she had come to getting killed. If the kick had hit its mark, it would have likely broken some ribs and caused internal injuries, which would have meant certain death. But Annie didn't seem shaken. She nibbled on willows, then sat down to rest. It began to snow in early afternoon. I sat with Annie for a while, then said goodbye. When I reached the top of the ridge, I looked back. Annie was watching me. She seemed so small sitting there and so alone. The snow gathering on her made her seem like part of the vast white landscape. In December, 2 blizzards passed through the valley and temperatures dropped 50 degrees. I hadn't seen Annie for a week and was a little worried. One morning, I plowed through knee-deep snow above Christian Creek Meadow. I didn't see Annie anywhere. The coyotes howling at dawn made me shiver. Annie could be out there in a snowdrift, defenseless against predators. I trudged down to the frozen creek, which had become a highway for wildlife moving through the area. I hoped to find Annie's tracks there. The fresh tracks of a snowshoe hare were joined by the prints of an interested coyote. Deer tracks followed the creek for 100 yards, then turned off into the woods. I stopped at the beaver pond, where runoff water from beneath the ice trickled through the tangle of aspen branches. Fluent water meant treacherous ice. Just as that thought came to mind, my left leg broke through the ice and plunged thigh deep into freezing water. My right kneecap slammed into the hard-edged ice, and I let out a yell. I slumped there in pain, one leg dangling beneath the ice. Finally, I pulled myself onto the beaver dam. Across its top, animal tracks showed intelligent use of the structure as a bridge across the dangerous ice. Whoever made these tracks, I thought, was smarter than me. Close inspection showed that they were made by a moose. So here's his drawing of himself falling in. The tracks continued across the woods, a snowfield into the woods. I followed them, hoping they might be Annie's. With my frozen left leg dragging my injured right one behind, I lurched through the snow like something out of a horror movie. The moose had paused at the edge of the woods and fed on pine branches. There were pine needles and moose droppings scattered on top of the snow, not as elongated as those of an adult moose. The droppings were the smaller, rounded pellets of a moose calf. I felt sure I was on Annie's trail. The trail took me through the woods to the edge of a cliff above willow flats, the same route Annie had taken with the young bull in September. A dark shape lay motionless in the white expanse below. I started down the steep slope carefully, but slipped right away and slid down like an otter, plunging into a snowdrift at the bottom. 20 yards away, Annie was lying in the snow. Her back was covered with frost, her eyelashes and whiskers were frozen white. Although the temperature was minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, she sat there watching me and chewing her cud like she was at a July picnic. Here's Annie in the snow. I lay there with snow all over me, my left leg frozen, my right leg throbbing with pain, and my hat and glove halfway up the hill. I was thrilled to see Annie, but I couldn't stay long. I told her what happened to me at the beaver pond. She listened quietly and kept at her cud. I went home to thaw out. During January, temperatures stayed well below zero and the snow kept coming. Annie's movements became slow and labored as she trudged through heavy snow, trying to reach food. Adult moose with their long legs are equipped to travel in deep snow. Calves just to stay behind their mothers and follow their paths. Annie didn't have a long-legged mother to break trail for her. She was even smaller than other calves, having missed out on 6 months of fat and calcium from her mother's milk. The snow was chest high on her, and drifts were even deeper than that. The cold didn't seem to bother her, but I knew she was burning precious fat reserves to stay warm. She was using up too much energy to reach winter food that had little nutritional value. One morning, I watched a coyote trotting along toward the atop the hard surface snow. Annie had just been chased off by a cow moose and was coming out of the willows. She was having a tough time breaking through that crust and plunging belly deep into the snow with each step. When she punched out into the open, she came face to face with the coyote. They both stopped instantly. The coyote stared hard at Annie, sizing her up. Annie stared back. Lowering his head, the coyote turned and skulked off in the direction where he had just come. He wasn't about to tangle with a moose by himself, even a calf. But what if he'd gone to get help? The coyote didn't come back with friends while I was there, but he had seen Annie, and that worried me. Animals that don't survive winter usually die just before spring when their fat reserves are gone. Annie had very little fat, even at the beginning of the season. I also worried about that coyote. Annie had no one to protect her against hungry predators, and the deep snow would make it very difficult for her to escape. In the first week of February, Annie disappeared. I searched anxiously for Annie. Every day I went to the heights above Willow Flats and scanned the area with binoculars. I watched coyotes in the distance hunting rabbits and mice. I saw dozens of moose feeding and resting among the frosted willows, but I didn't see the little moose I wanted to see. I traveled the extent of her range and beyond in all directions. There was no sign of her. No tracks, no pellets, no Annie-sized depressions in the snow, nothing. Weeks went by until a month had passed and still no trace of Annie. I feared the worst. I became alarmed at any scavenging activity of ravens and magpies. When I ran across coyotes in the willows, I regarded them with distrust and stared accusingly at them. I had always liked coyotes, but now I saw them as enemies. I thought of all the possibilities. Could she have traveled to another place far away? No, the going would have been too rough for her. Maybe she had followed an adult moose to some other place, but that also seemed unlikely. I thought of the bad stuff. What if a coyote had come back with others and found Annie belly deep in a snowdrift? What if a mountain lion had come into the area, hunting deer and discovering Annie? What if a poacher had come into the flats looking for an easy target? What if Annie had fallen through thin ice or been buried under a snowslide? In spite of the worries, I didn't give up hope because I hadn't found any proof, one way or the other, of the other. Annie was just gone, so I kept looking. In March, a discovery on a forested ridge to the north brought new hope. Beneath the towering evergreens were dozens of depressions in the snow where an animal had bedded down. Scattered all around these beds were moose droppings, small pellets of a calf. Exploring the area, I found that the huge trees formed a canopy over the forest floor. They caught the falling snow, keeping the ground around their trunks fairly dry. A little moose could get around up here. There was shelter and plenty of pine needles and aspen twigs to eat. It seemed certain that a moose calf had been wintering there. Everywhere there were signs of a calf, and only occasionally the tracks and scat of an adult moose. Still, I hadn't seen the calf or any other moose in the dense timber. But I also knew that Annie was good at hiding, and there were 100 places to hide in these woods. On St. Patrick's Day, I hoped for the luck of the leprechauns when in new snow, I came across fresh tracks. In fact, there were 2 sets of tracks traveling side by side in the same direction. At first, I thought the calf had doubled back and come the same way twice, but neither set veered off and circled around. The trail had obviously been made by 2 moose. My heart sank. It couldn't be Annie. After I'd become convinced that Annie was alive and living in these woods, it was now clear that 2 moose were wintering on the ridge under the trees. 2 moose had snuggled up next to each other during the freezing nights. They were probably a small first-year mother, and her calf. And here he is looking at the tracks. And then here are the tracks that he saw. So, let's see. Suddenly, a movement in the trees caught my eye. In the tangle of brush and pine trees 20 yards ahead, I could see the forms of 2 moose. I crouched behind a log and waited. After a few minutes, one moved cautiously into the open. It was a female calf, the same age as Annie. Her mother was still hidden in the trees. Moments later, the other moose stepped into the clearing and looked right at me. It wasn't the calf's mother. It was another calf. It was another calf. Sorry.
Darker than the first.
Oh, you've got it. Darker than the first, thanks, Rosalie, and smaller. And the wet hair over her withers stood straight up like the quills of a porcupine. Annie, I blinked in disbelief, but there she stood, calm and unafraid. The first calf followed her gaze, saw me, and bolted. Annie went too, and they high-stepped across the clearing into cover. The other calf must have lost her mother during the winter, and now the 2 orphans were inseparable. Where one went, the other went. They even nibbled on the same pine branches together.
With their muzzles touching. Not only was Annie alive, but she had found a friend. Annie and her new friend stayed up in her high refuge for the rest of the winter.
Yeah. Here, let me show the picture. Let me show this picture of, this is Annie and her friend. And she's the one whose withers, the hair is standing straight up on her back. It's her, yeah. Thanks, Rosalie.
In spring, they made their way back to Willow Flats, where they fed on the tender buds of willows. No longer a lonely orphan calf, Annie was just one of many yearly moose fending for themselves in the wild. Want to go? You want me to go? You've been reading a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, read it. I'm going to start crying again. You read it. Read the last.
Okay. At an overlook above Willow Flats, thousands of people stop in summer to look for moose. Their binoculars might come to rest on a young female moose who, at first, might seem like all the others. Perhaps some people will notice that she is smaller and more spirited than the others. And maybe they'll wonder about that, but they won't know why. They won't know that this little yearling moose they have focused on should not, by all accounts, be alive. They won't know that she had lost her mother when she was only a few weeks old and had nobody to nurse and protect her, and that she had been lonely and scared for most of her life. They won't know the hardships that she faced by herself, the predators and the hunters, the bone-chilling winds, drifting snows, treacherous ice, and minus 40-degree temperatures. They won't know how she hid in the willows, waiting for her mother, who never came back. How she tried to make friends with other moose, but she was always chased off and was nearly killed by one. They won't know that she never felt sorry for herself, that she never gave up. She just found a way to survive. People who come to the Overlook and see Annie down in the flats won't know any of this. But we know all about the miracle of Annie's life and how she came to be out there, feeding on willows and just being a moose. So if you ever find yourself in Wyoming's high country, somewhere near Christian Creek, and are lucky enough to see a small, spunky moose with the hair on her shoulders standing straight up, like porcupine quills, you will know then that you are looking at a very special moose. And if I knew a moose sound, I'd make it. Moo.
Thank you, Rosalie. That was a great ending. Yeah, little Annie of Christian Creek.
I want to apologize to everybody, and especially to Betty. I have been through some trauma recently and get triggered, and I am part Irish. But Betty, I did listen to the last part of the story.
Good. I'm glad
And
you did.
it is a lovely story. I mean, it's very moving and very difficult and traumatic, but it is a story that does, I can see why you wanted to read it. So I'm sorry.
No apologies. I understand. It's hard losing a friend.
Yeah, I was trying not to cry this morning. And actually, it was one of the first mornings I'd gotten through without crying. But now I've been crying ever since. But I think Bella wants some tears maybe at times. So there we are. You were waiting as well.
Actually, Artie was great, Jill. You missed the Baba part. That was intensely Baba. Oh, I guess. Oh, let's see. All right, we could. If there's
I do have a question.
Yeah.
I do need to understand what these story times are about. What's the theme for them?
Bring your favorite story. That's really all. It's not necessarily Baba story. Of course, Baba stories are welcome, but it's not just bring a story that moves you, that you love.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be children either. It often is, but yeah, bring your favorite story and share it. Yeah.
Okay. When I apologize to everybody here for anyway.
Oh, you've endeared yourself to everybody. So yeah, I'm so taken with the love of this man. This man loved this baby moose and did, was with her. He must be a naturalist. It was, stayed with her every day, followed her. Oh, I was so impressed. And his skill. He's a great artist and photographer. Wow. I was, yeah. I just love how he really got the character of this little feisty moose. So yeah. Any questions or comments or anything? Wendy.
I think I will always think of you and Rosalie as those two moose. As I will. And that's a compliment.
of the moose in the meadow. My pal Rosalie Moose.
It's truly a metaphor to me of the story. You needed help. I didn't have the book, and Rosalie just at the paper, you stepped in, read it, and it was beautiful. To me, it just wrapped that story up.
That's sweet. Jill, we don't know how this will go. This is just this is, what is it? This is the we're just gonna put our fingers in the wind and see what happens. See
Betty,
what
Betty,
yeah.
Betty, Baba gave you a taste of not knowing how things will go before this.
Ain't
A
it
very
true?
strong taste. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Rosalie, I
But
hope
I want to say something about it. Really kind of originated with children's books
yes, it's true.
because, yeah, there was that sharing. And I just wanted to say something about children's books because I consider Margaret Crast, her books, where she relates her time with Baba as a pure children's story. Now, why I say that is sometimes adults, they'll talk down to children, and the children will know it immediately and in some way. Yeah. But when the story doesn't talk down, doesn't throw in big words, because you've learned big words in 30, 40, 50, how many years. But in defense of, I only read really Baba books and children's books.
Yeah.
In defense. And even to the point where one day Mehera said, Rosalie is like a child. And Mehera knew things. She just always knew. I could see her with different people. She just knew. And I think the whole point of the children's book, it touches the heart. And what could be more Baba than touching the heart? And I will say, whenever I've invited someone to a quotes Baba meeting, I've had the most miserable time at the meeting because I feel, oh, what are they thinking? Oh my God. Oh, how did that happen? Horrible. So I don't invite people to Baba meetings. I give them the Baba card. Don't worry, be happy. I tell you, I can't accept that reaction. I have such an extreme reaction. It's out of our control. Baba doesn't need salespeople. He doesn't need evangelists. But a story like this, like Baba says, he was speaking to the film world, but this is visual, beautifully visual. Actually, Betty gifted me with a copy of this for my birthday this year. And it's a precious book, But I must admit, even sometimes a long children's book, I haven't read it. So I was kind of riveted to know what happened. And it's like, I knew I would read it. I knew it was a precious story to Betty and that I would read it. Yeah. And I would say how things got started was there were two children's books that I shared with the Mandali. The one was King Bounce the First, incredible Baba story. And the other is I shared with Mehera, and it was this one. Suho, it's a Mongolian tale. Suho and the White Horse. Not only does it speak of Kalki Avatar taking on the suffering of humanity, which kills him, kills the horse, but then he lives in the hearts of the people, because his owner, who's deeply grieved, fashions a horse head fiddle.
Mhm.
What could be more perfect? He is called the Avatar. And I didn't have to know Mehera's reaction to this story. I loaned her the book. I gave it to her. I just gave it. I mean, with Mehera, you just wanted to share yourself, whatever. It was just such a blessing sitting there with her, So I never got her verbal response, but the book came back to me when Mehera passed. And if they knew anything came from you, they sent it back to you. So I got the book back. It's a precious story. So anyway, but I was just thinking of this. It just really struck a chord. I came for a Baba meeting. It just struck that chord of, what is a Baba meeting? I think of this mini little poem by Brabazon. It says, we met, exchanged greetings, maybe Jai Baba, and went on laughing. In each one's laughter was news of the beloved. To me, that's a Baba meeting.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful poem. Hey,
Well, I
Rosie.
would say this. I'm Irish too, Jill. But the Irish women were warriors, and it triggered off a little bit of warrior in me. So, I had to control myself too.
Yeah, Rosalie,
We all have everything coming up at the same time, Jill. This is
Well,
Baba manifesting.
Well, I realized that, and that's really been a big lesson for me today. I mean, you're extraordinarily sensitive, Rosalie. I think, I really feel that in you, and I could have handled
I'm
this so
too
much better.
sensitive. It's not fun.
Well, I'm too
No.
sensitive too. When I
I
was growing
know.
up,
I know.
my father would say, Jill, why are you so sensitive? Why can't you be more like your sisters? Because they were very vivacious and outgoing. And
Oh my God.
so the sensitivity can get us in trouble. And but I guess what I'm learning today, I'm careful joining Zoom meetings, especially if I can be triggered. And so I'm careful. So this took me by surprise. And I wish I'd handled it better. But I love the ending of the story. And what I really felt, Betty and Rosalie, was just what you said, Rosalie, like we're all going through a lot of things, every Baba lover. And the story was kind of, keep going, stay, alert and calm. It's a huge message, really, Betty, for what you go through, and Rosalie and everybody here.
Everyone. Yeah, it's like it. And I love Baba's words. Don't feel down by what I bring up in you, because he's not going to stop bringing it up. That's his work, to clear us, clear. But it's not a smooth ride. And when you have a rocky ride, like if you were on the roller coaster, you would hang on for dear life. That's what it feels like.
I do want to say one other thing here, because I've been doing a lot of research into Baba's work with women. And one of the discoveries I've made, which I do think, Baba says critical thinking is really essential for love. And that without critical thinking, we really can't love and use our intuition in a wise way. And so doing this research, I learned that in general, a vast generality, but statistics show that women have a lot more difficulty handling trauma like in a movie, if a woman and a man go to a movie and there's scenes of violence or trauma or something,
Yeah.
it can take women days to shake off the scene, whereas men can usually handle it with more detachment. So that I think this is useful to know, because I think, I know that when I share things with other people, I try not to cause some trauma. Like today I caused trauma. I'm sorry again. But I do think it's good to keep it in mind when we share things with each other in Baba meetings, to to kind of gauge the situation and the people as to what people can, what is going to awaken the heart the most deeply, the heart and the mind. So anyway, I'm going to end because Mehera,
I have to say, I don't know. I don't think we have a good. Things are changing so fast, so much. Baba's manifesting. So we don't have the same gauge we had. And it's good we don't, because it doesn't apply. It's not applicable.
We'll see.
It's like,
we'll see if this is a valuable thing to people. It remains to be seen. Maybe it doesn't quite strike, and a book I love, maybe.
Well, I have to say, Betty, you were courageous to read for so long. Oh my God, that was a feat beyond belief.
Oh, that was, yeah, I am wondering. Well, we'll see. We'll see if it's something that catches on. That's wonderful. And if it doesn't quite resonate, that's okay too. Yeah.
I'd like to say something about attention span. They think children have short attention spans. Adults have zero attention span. I mean, really. So to read this beautiful story in a natural setting that was difficult. This poor little thing lost his mother. It's like seeing Bambi again. Yeah. Remember Bambi? Oh, yeah. The only thing you remember is, oh my God, he lost his parents and there was a fire. It was horrible. That was a children's story. Yeah, they see the truth in things.
Mehera, you have your hand up.
Yeah.
Mehera, you have your hand
Yes. So, well, one thing I wanted to ask Betty, is this the story as he saw the pictures are real?
It's true, yes. He took the pictures, he did the drawing, yeah. It's a true story, yeah.
And is that the real moose?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is her. Here she is. That's Annie.
Oh, yeah. That's the real Annie. Oh,
yes,
nice.
It's real. Yeah, it's a real story. Yeah.
So where it happened? In Canada or US?
Wyoming, Grand Tetons, he said.
Oh, yeah. Wyoming is in US. Okay.
Near Canada. Near Canada. Yeah.
North US. Yeah.
North, yeah.
Okay. And I have to say, while thinking about the story, while you're reading, I can't. Two messages, Baba, which I recently read on animals, came back to back. First one, it's so still. I'm trying to understand what Baba said about animal suffering is. There's no purpose for an animal to suffer, and he said they have to be relieved, because, like human, the bad karma will not take away your anything for animal. Okay. That's so profound. And other thing which he said, I shared yesterday also with Rosalind actually. In a message on love, he says, if a tiger is eating a animal, it's still love for that animal, is what he said. And still, I can't. Sometimes, yeah, I can see the point, but I still have to, get into it, because what he's saying is making sense, because we eat animals too. And we never thought like the same way when we see that other side of it. But I think these two messages came back to back. But thanks for the story, though.
You're welcome. I don't know if it's really. I wonder if maybe older children. I don't know. I think Adi Ram's a little young for such a sad. You have to. I don't know.
No,
but older child.
No, he takes it easier. I mean, for them also it is good to know these things. Let's see. This is a good story for him because we have exposed him to many things like this. Like all the stories have these elements. My view is the wildness, but we have to see how it goes with him. But we have to take it. But I am, when we were kids in India, we used to have Misha. I'm trying to get those books, but like Rosalind is a story, collector. Did she ever came across Misha from Russia? There's a storybook for children, like a magazine which
Is it,
used to
like
come.
comics, like comic books?
Yeah, it's not a comic, but it's something which you read. It's similar stuff
Uh,
there.
uh-huh. Oh, too bad you don't have them to show us.
Yeah,
Which I read. Who read it? Who
we used
read
to
it,
read when
Meher?
we used to read when we were kids.
Oh,
He
you
read
don't have the, you don't have a, okay, yeah.
And I looked all over US. It seems is there in some library in Texas somewhere, Houston. So when I go to Houston, I will go there. So, but that is from Russia. It used to come because India has a pact with Russia, I think, and the Russians used to send all these comics to Indian schools. And I used to read it somewhere in one of our friends' places. But it's so beautiful stories. It's called Misha, though. Somebody in Meherabad must be read it too, is what I thought. But maybe,
Oh, so
yeah,
title would be Misha. Maybe we can look at
Misha.
you. We look at used bookstores all the time.
Have
Rosalie
an
and I,
eye on it, Misha.
Misha. Okay,
Yeah.
well, we can look and see. Maybe, yeah. Wendy's got a hand up. Oh,
Yep. When you commented on young children's, hearing these stories, the what's the word? The lesson in it, and the impact, better the child hears it in story form and then starts building a positive story with it rather than it happening first time out there in the real world. It gives them the feedback.
Yeah.
oh, and again,
It gives them time to feel what it means to them within themselves, because the fairy tales bring some really like shocking things,
it's true.
and it just does, you can name any story, fairy tale, and they're like, wow.
The
But they
original,
can take it. You're right, Wendy. They can on their own time.
Mhm. And the original Grimm's fairy tales, the paintings
Yeah.
were really horrific.
Yes, they were.
Oh yeah.
But those are real. This is a real story. That's what.
Yeah, no,
But they were told in a way that they were told in a way that did not. I could always read them without going through trauma, and that's hard to explain why. And I did want to mention, in the last few weeks, I've learned that people that lose pets go through tremendous amounts of grief, just like using, and like this is more difficult for me than it was to lose my parents.
Yeah,
And one of the problems is that I had to do everything by myself. I was completely alone, and I don't have a support system. I've had no people calling to comfort me or anything like that. And so in being alone when you're going through what's a huge loss, it is, I think, and I'm saying this because I think that one of the gifts, I bet the Baba group will be starting to do this at some point, is to start not only gathering around people who lose a person, but people who lose pets, because everybody goes through this, and the country's getting better. I discovered also there's a lot more awareness of this, that the professionals that I worked with were really, they were the ones that brought so much comfort. And I was very impressed with the professional awareness. So I just think that as we move into Baba's new age, that sensitivity to these things will awaken. I also want to say I watched Bambi once, and I can still not think of that movie without that trauma. So I'm one of these people that trauma just it endures for me, and so I'm very careful of what I expose myself to. And Erich actually talked to me about this, to learn to protect myself from people and situations that up the trauma level. There's no reason that we need to put ourselves through this.
It's true.
So I don't go to movies or watch TV shows that will exacerbate it. And but like Rose, you know, when you're because I'm more sensitive to it than a lot of other people. So learning to be understanding of that. And in Baba meetings, one of the big lessons for me that I have trouble learning, you know, is to really appreciate everybody's different way of being with Baba. Sometimes somebody's way of being with Baba aggravates me, and I just have to learn to be quiet and kind of I just don't feel like I've got enough of Baba's love in me yet, you know, far from being a mandali. So the whole struggle is, and to end with, I did bring something to read, and it was John Stevens writing about tenderness. Because remember last week, the ghazal that was picked was tenderness. So I don't need to read that if we don't have time. I could save it for another week.
We have time. We have time. I have time. I don't know about everybody here, but
well, I'll read the very short version then. Okay. And excuse me, my eyesight's really bad, so I have to lift it up close. Don has been going through a hallway. This is an inner experience he had, a dream. And at the end of the hallway, he was being led to meet God. Not Meher Baba, but Meher Baba's father, God. A millisecond after realizing God was inside the open doorway, I felt a surge of great tenderness swirling quietly around me. It was God's tenderness, no question. All that formed as a question was, tenderness for what? As I asked the question, I knew already the answer. It was his tenderness for his children. That was incredible, and I had to reflect quickly. And no sooner the reflection started, than again I knew the answer. It was for having had to ask his children to do a very great and important job for him, to pass long years completely cut off from all contact with their own true self, which remained within the fact of infinite oneness, which is the truth of everything. And even as another wave of tenderness hit me, it was all I could do to continue to stagger along with the helping hand of my spiritual guide. The depth and sweetness of that wave of God's tenderness for his children hit me so hard, I felt I could not stand another moment. But I did take the next step and the next, and then I knew that my entire life had changed. Here was a secret of the nature of God, so central and important that all else seemed nothing in comparison. Even the greatest heights of joy and incredible inner attainments I had sometimes thought I had achieved were mere nothings in comparison. Here was truth and reality, such as I had never imagined it. If God could have one small part of his being so incredible and full and explosive and filled with this harmony as I was experiencing, then what must all of God be?
Can you read that last sentence again? If I'm spaced.
Oh, okay. If God could have one small part of his being so incredible and full and explosive and filled with the harmony as I was experiencing it, then what must all of God be?
Wow. Thank you.
This is in Laura Weichberger's biography of Dawn.
Right. It's called Dawn.
It's
Isn't it?
called An Almost Perfect
I've
Balance.
almost proved that right. Yeah, I was thinking about getting it.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing that, Jill.
And it does fit right with your story, Betty. You
Oh,
know, it does. It just fits one and the other.
Was that in print, Jill?
Yes,
Yeah, what book is that in?
An Almost Perfect Balance.
it just came out, Rosalie. It's Laurent's newest book on Dawn. New.
Yeah, interesting for me, the way I saw Don. I saw him as so sophisticatedly guarded. He had learned to be in the world in this very sophisticated, guarded way. So for him to come to meet God in human form, it must have been so refreshing. Oh my God, because he was so guarded. This is how I saw Don Stevens, because I thought I didn't admire that sophistication. But still, that was his path. That was how he was. And it just floored me that it was beautiful to hear his actual meeting and how Bubba was so welcoming to him. He had carte blanche. He could come there anytime. Bubba told him, you can come whenever you're in India. Come on by.
Hey, Wendy, before you go, you want to do the next, do yours the next time? We could probably maybe set it up a little bit like this rather than well, anyway, did you want to do the,
I can, or Rosalie can read the horsey one. That's a lovely one. I'm okay. I really don't mind. If Rosalie wants to read the horse, I'm okay with that.
Rosalie, I'd love to hear your Kashmir one, the story about Baba and Kashmir. That's not in print. I would love to see that one.
Yeah, that's so beautiful.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Yeah, it seems to be hard to get.
Well, I don't know that it's no longer in print because it was like a comic series, so-called comic book series. But I'd sure like to send them whatever, however I could reach them, a text or to say how much it was so beautiful. It's all in watercolor. And it talks about Baba's 5 different trips to Kashmir. And what Baba said, Kashmir was the
But you're not going to do it right now, are you? Like,
no, I don't say a word.
Would
Yeah.
you?
it's only
Yeah. Would you do it, Rosalie, next time? Bring it and show it and read it?
You know, it's so funny. Everything's so intense. I mean, I certainly intended to come today, but I have other things going on that are intense. So, you know, I was a little late.
I'll do backup. If you can't, if you're late, I'll cover you with what I was going to do. So,
Yeah, I think it's an idea. You set up with different people, Betty. You know, that they have something to offer.
Yeah.
And not so strict trying to, you know, to.
I think maybe this one is the way to do it, just at the end of this meeting.
You know, Wendy has something I have things to share. I'm certainly willing. I love these things. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now it's not next week is Mehera's tea again. So it's the following Tuesday after Mehera. It's the Tuesdays in between. I'll remind you. I'll check with you. Let's put it that way. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. Just do it another time. Okay. And Jill, if you've got anything you think you might want to, or Mehera, anybody, Ralph.
Yeah.
Think of it. Okay.
Or also, like, if you know, if someone shared something that you think, oh, that would be good, and you go to the person and say, would you be willing to share that again?
Right. Okay.
More like a kind of campfire, you know,
Yeah.
you share.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful.
Yeah, you share things you love. And I have to say this funny thing. I made the mistake one time of being at a Dooney fire with Padre, pillar of Mehera, one of the pillars, accused me of being disrespectful. But for me, I knew it was special, but also it was a campfire.
Uh,
And if I feel like laughing, I will laugh because it's a campfire. Well, it was like a clash of culture,
mhm.
you know. I mean, it was like no one was right.
I don't know, Rosalie, this is one of the ways in which I disagree with you, because when I got reprimanded by Amandali, I always took that as a learning experience. And I remember how Erich was always so nice to me. And, you know, I found that troubling. And one day he said, well, next time, Jill, would you like me to, he said he throttled Devana until she was no more. And he said, would you like that treatment too? And I said, okay, next time. You know, so I kind of think that the Mandali did sort of throttle us a little bit, but I'm not ready for the real treatment. I'm not ready for Devana's treatment. I just
You're not Havana. We're all one, but so what? I mean, did I not learn something? Jill, is that what you're saying?
well,
They were my family. They were my spiritual family.
no, your way
That
is
I don't,
right,
that
Rosalie.
I don't doubt. No one had to tell me.
Okay, sorry,
I felt I felt at home. That doesn't mean I don't disagree with an uncle,
no, the
but
Mandali were always,
the main thing was I loved being around Mehera because it was being around Baba. There was no separation for me. And whatever I bring to life, she could accept. That's a big deal. So I really couldn't kind of agree with you not agreeing, because I think it was like, yeah.
yeah,
I
that
mean,
was
things
probably-
don't have to make sense anymore because we're going towards intuition anyway. We don't have to make sense.
well, they
That's-
do. See, we're different there too, because intuition, when you read Baba's discourse on qualifications of the aspirant, he says very clearly that as we move towards intuition, we need our critical thinking, because without our critical thinking, we get locked into mob movements and what other people think, so that we need to learn to think things out for ourselves in order to use our intuition wisely. And but actually, Rosalie, I mean, I don't mean to disagree with you, because I was with them. I saw how the Mandali treated you and loved you and adored you. I saw that. And we've each got our own path. And your path is exactly right for you. So I'm sorry if I stepped on that in any way.
No, it wasn't stepping on it, but I couldn't agree with that is happening. You know, it felt like you were, I don't know. It was uncomfortable. I couldn't just say, oh, yes, Jill. Yes, no, I couldn't.
Yeah, no, that's one reason I don't speak out
Yeah.
in meetings. I will make everybody uncomfortable because I'm really into critical thinking, and I've done a lot of research about my thoughts. And I think my thoughts probably are not agreeable to people very much. So there we are.
Well, I would say we're at the point world-wise, globe-wise, universe-wise, the bad part of critical thinking and mind. That's why we have to go towards heart, because the balance is shot. And something shot, it's not working.
Hey guys, I think I'm gonna wrap this up unless there's some burning. I'm sorry. I'm
Time to go.
just ready to
Interesting word, Betty. Interesting choice of words.
You mean burning?
You could have said moose.
Oh, I hope you come and talk about it. I want to see that book. It's a beautiful book. It
You know,
deserves.
I'm just gonna say that Rosalie, you may have actually saved my life once in India. It was Rosalie who found me at about 4 a.m. when I was dying of hypothermia after food poisoning in the hospital. And I'd been there on that cold cement for about 7 or 8 hours.
At the Pilgrim Center, right?
Yeah, and that man had to keep me on electrolytes for the next hours and wasn't even sure she could save me. So Rosalie, you may have saved my life.
Wow, that
Sometimes
sounds
we need to say
serious. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah.
So Rosalie, honestly, I just thank God and Mehera for Rosalie. You're a treasure.
Bar.
It's so funny. It's like so much in the mystical language is accepting all as it is. It's
Right.
really hard. We have to hold on and accept all as it is. It's like the mind goes, what?
Exactly. Exactly.
Speak of critical thinking, like, whoa. But I tell you what Adi told me briefly. He says, you need to be kinder to yourself. This is his personal advice for me. Adi Rani, not for everybody. And I remember that to this day as such a compassionate, you might say, uncle.
Wow. Yeah.
Adi was boy, he had a sweet side. He took care of children. I know he supported children of the servants. Yeah, I mean, he was like a fatherly Mandali. Yeah.
That's nice to hear, because you hear mostly the fiery Adi.
Oh no, he was like so sweet. You could see him melt around a child, just melt. Yeah, in an instant. And he was a fiery, woo. Yeah, beautiful fire, but he was fiery.
Okay.
Anyway,
Okay.
Baba.
Yeah, Jay Baba. I'm gonna at least turn off the recording. Here we go. All right. You forgot you were recorded, right? Why can't I do it?
Well, it's my MO to make one mistake a day. Only one. I
Okay.
allow one mistake.